thanks everybody for coming out. Hopefully you can all hear me. I don't actually hear very well, so if anybody has questions, kind of wave and speak very loudly. And with that, let's, as Randy said, what I am really interested in is kind of the linkage between a bunch of these different issues. So one way to look at all of these issues is to divide them up into pieces, like the Sustainable Development Goals. And so this is really a way to make a lot of progress in some cases, and I was very happy in 2015 when the Paris Agreement went through, the SDGs were approved, there was a lot of world progress. And climate action in particular is what I've spent a lot of my career on. So great that that's a goal. And of course, good health and well-being is a goal, but this kind of implies that these are all distinct goals. And of course, if you really try to do something about, say, climate, you're going to really change the way we produce energy and move from place to place and generate our food. And of course, that's going to affect life on land and life on water and access to clean energy and hunger and health. And so really, all of these things are, of course, quite closely tied together. And one way that I like to think about that is to think about the health impacts from climate and air quality. And this is often the way that I see these pictures. So for example, in the United States, we have, in our federal system, we have a cost applied to carbon emissions, at least calculated for carbon emissions, and it includes the effect of climate change on public health, which changes disease vectors, it changes weather, it changes lots of different aspects of climate change. But air quality is quite distinct, and we have a lot of people, of course, that work on air quality too. And so these are very useful ways to make progress on parts of the issue. But let's consider for a moment food production. Right? How much food we have affects how many people die from malnutrition, how many people suffer from stunting, etc. What governs food production? Well, both of these. When we change climate, we change the ability to grow food. When we change air quality, we also change the ability to grow food. Right? That's both the aerosols and the ozone. Ozone is toxic to people, which is why we get things like these diseases. But it's also toxic to plants. And then climate change itself affects air quality. That's actually one of the main links that the US Supreme Court cited in 2007 in their kind of landmark ruling, saying that CO2 should be regulated under the Clean Air Act as a pollutant. Because in addition to causing climate change, it affects air quality, which was the whole point of the Clean Air Act in the first place. So that link is very clear, very important. And so when you divide these things, it's kind of a common way to go, but you miss some potential important linkages. And just to highlight some of the things that can go wrong if you're only thinking of a part of the problem, here's an example from Scientific American of a study I was not involved in, but quite interesting, looking at the war on air pollution in China. We've all heard about things like air apocalypse and this terrible air quality. And so one of the strategies to deal with that is to invest in building new clean coal-fired power plants, which you can build very quickly. They don't emit nearly as much pollution. Your pollution drops, but you lock in lots of heavy CO2 emitters for decades and decades. And it can actually make global warming worse, depending on what scenario you compare it to. Another is this talked about idea that there's too much pollution in the east where all the people live, so we'll build these coal to gas plants way out west, send the gas east, burn it there, no pollution, everybody's happy. Well, everybody's happy except the climate, because coal to gas takes a huge amount of energy. So this is a disaster for climate, even though you could rationalize it quite clearly for air quality. In Europe, there's been a lot of promotion of diesel. Why? Diesel has a lower carbon footprint. So great, let's have diesel instead of conventional gasoline, and we'll have cleaner cities from a climate point of view. But it actually can really compromise air quality. We have bad air quality in degradation in London, Paris, some other cities in Europe, precisely because people are thinking about one aspect or the other, but not the combined picture. So first issue, these are linked. Second point, probably everybody here knows, but I know that you are not all so enamored of the air as me, and some people work in other aspects of health. This is just taken from the Global Burden of Disease and highlights that environmentally speaking, and just going by this quantitative ranking, air pollution is the #1 environmental cause of premature death worldwide. Right? It's actually the #1 of any cause for women and children in many parts of the world, especially developing countries where traditional cook stoves are used and there's a lot of indoor air pollution. Right? So air pollution not only is linked to the other issues, but it's really important. Now there are things on here too that are much more lifestyle choices, smoking, drinking. Another issue that I want to highlight, because I'm going to return to it, is a lot of these involve food. Right? So just keep in mind that if you look at the top 20, a whole bunch of them involve diet. So I'm going to return to diet a little later. Now let's stick with air. So why don't we, if it's so important, why don't we have great air quality everywhere, right? If you think in kind of the most basic psychological feeling, we can all see nice areas in, say, the North Carolina countryside, and we can see the difference when there's pollution on the ground, right? It's immediately obvious. We all hate this kind of thing. Same thing with the water, nice lake, terrible pollution. We would all think this is awful. We don't want this. Psychologically, it's really easy to get a grip on these kind of problems. It's not necessarily so easy to do something about water pollution in particular. We drive along the highway and you see a factory or a power plant and you think, oh, there's pollution, but really it's just kind of benign white stuff and it all dissipates and it's probably mostly water vapor. Who really cares? And it's not my responsibility. Even if it is your responsibility, right? You turn on your car, a bunch of pollution comes out the exhaust. But we don't say, oh, this is just as bad as polluting the land or the water. Even though, right, we just saw this is actually air pollution is killing a lot more people than water pollution or soil pollution. So psychologically, it's a difficult thing to get people to really think of the issue of air pollution as being a top priority, the same way some of these others are. Ethically, there are some issues about why should I make a change? How do the benefits, which are spread out around the whole planet, how do those relate to what I'm doing as an individual? That's why we have things like cost in the US government system. Right? How do you put a price on that? And how do you make that kind of salient to people? Climate is also involved, as I mentioned, and so scientifically you have another complexity that goes in. How do you communicate the risk of climate change, which is even less visible and more diffuse than air quality, right? We think, oh, that pollution coming out the tailpipe of the car, that spreads everywhere. But part of that is CO2, which not only spreads everywhere and makes it hard to grapple with, but it lasts for centuries, right? So how do you grapple with it being totally removed from your everyday experience, not only in space, but also in time? It's a really hard problem. And so one of the things that I find very valuable about linking climate to health and food is that it relates climate to things that we can really grasp more on a kind of basic level. So scientifically, climate is one of the big challenges, but we have a lot of efforts for climate. So one area where I think we can make some progress is looking at specific climate forcing agents. So this, I won't go through all the details or anything. This is just a summary chart from the last IPCC assessment, which has all the main agents driving climate change. Anything to the right of this line is making it warmer, anything to the left making it cooler. And so CO2 is the top bar. It's by far the biggest thing. We all know CO2 is the thing you have to pull down when you want to deal with climate change. But there are other things too, and those three that are circled are methane, carbon monoxide, and black carbon. These are all things that both cause warming, right? They're on the right side, and they directly lead to air pollution, right? Methane makes ozone. Ozone's toxic to people and plants. Carbon monoxide, the same thing. Black carbon, little particles from incomplete combustion, part of the particulate matter that, again, leads to these adverse public health impacts. So these degrade air quality. You put them together, they're actually pretty large. And if you think of these as short-lived climate pollutants, they're not as powerful as CO2 overall because they don't stay in the atmosphere so long. Then short-lived climate pollutants have the advantage of being clearly beneficial if you reduce them to both climate and the public health. So that's one area where I think we've been able to make some progress. It's easy then, relatively speaking, to do analyses of how you could really pull down those emissions of those kind of pollutants and see public health benefits. And so this is from one of the studies we did. You phase in these measures to control these pollutants. You get something like 0.5 degree less global warming over the next few decades. That has meaning to some people, but even more kind of readily understandable, cumulatively, you could save over 40 million lives. But that has meaning to a lot of people. And when you go and say, look, you can do something for climate, and it gives you a few tenths of a degree, 4 tenths, 5 tenths or something, people say, very nice. And you could save 40 million people. Oh, really? That's nice. We would like to save 40 million people's lives. So this kind of work is something I've been trying to push for several years, trying to reduce pollution that both drives warming and leads to degraded air quality. What we try to do is look at the premature mortalities that would be avoided by reducing these pollutants around the world, look at the climate benefits. We also look at things like agriculture. And another nice thing about this is that you can see somewhat of a coincidence, but the temperature benefits and the avoided climate damages are often greatest in the higher latitude countries. The avoided mortalities are often greatest in the developing world. And so unlike CO2, where when you sit down at a table with a lot of different countries, you tend to get fingers pointing in developed countries saying, we're not doing anything until you come along and do just as much as us, and developing countries saying, well, historically you did way more, so even though our emissions are larger now, and it kind of goes back and forth. Here, everybody has a reason to do this for their own sake. It's not the same reason, right? So the reason that India or Pakistan or Bangladesh would mostly want to reduce these pollutants is because there are huge local benefits for public health. The reason that Norway or Canada or the United States might really want to push for this is because of climate benefits. And so in fact, when she was Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton launched a coalition which had 6 countries at the time, and developed countries joined this coalition to deal with climate and clean air simultaneously. And developed countries have been providing most of the funding, Norway, Canada, Japan, US, these northern countries. But developing countries have joined for the sake of public health, right? And so you have this partnership, instead of an adversarial relationship, everybody sees a benefit, which is quite different. So the order of the words here could, I think, be reversed depending on where you were discussing this. They had to pick something. But most of the developed countries think of this as a climate with clean air co-benefit actions. Most of the developing countries think of it as clean air policies that have climate co-benefits. And I think that's fine, because it doesn't really matter. They don't have to agree on what's leading, what's the entry point, and what comes along for the ride. The point is, this way, they're both going in the same direction. The World Bank has joined, has provided funding to kind of provide mechanisms. If you just look at, for example, methane, and you just treat it as a climate-altering gas or just an air pollutant, you would get kind of a low value because it does some of each. Right? And really, there's no existing mechanisms to put it all together. So the World Bank is trying to create one, trying to move forward. So that's part of the work that I think is going on, that's productive, that links these things together. But it still leaves a lot of other policies and potential interventions on the table. So one of the things that I've been working on, separate from that, are the kind of large-scale transitions of the energy and transportation sector. Right? So in particular, how countries of the world would meet their targets under the Paris Accord. Right? So we had this landmark moment when everybody said, we're going to go ahead and do this. But then you have to convince people back at home, okay, we said we'd go for emissions consistent with 2 degrees. How do we do that? Why should we do that? Should we really do that? Is that too much trouble? So, You can do things like calculate the climate change that you get, and this is some of the thing you hear from our some of the members of our incoming government. The United States should not bother taking these kind of actions, the things that Obama administration pledged, because the differences will be so small, we will not even really be able to see them under outside of natural variability. Right? So this is looking at essentially electrification of virtually all passenger transport, decarbonizing the full energy sector, so nearly all of our power comes from renewable sources. Big transitions. And so you can make the argument, oh, you got 1/10 of a degree, that's within the variability. And so it's a true argument. It's somewhat ridiculous in the sense that you could just break things down even further and say, back to every individual. Why should I not turn on my car and send out pollution from the tailpipe? Me alone, I don't do anything. So every country in the world will give such a small contribution, they will look like nothing. But everybody together is, of course, the only way we solve this problem. One thing that I think is helpful, though, is not just to provide analyses of what kind of climate impacts you get. The Clean Power Plan is promoted first and foremost as a climate action, and that would be about half of what's modeled here. The scenarios are all developed in the climate community anyway that I'm most familiar with, looking at emissions consistent with 2 degrees. There's even a push to look for 1.5, based on climate. But what comes along, right? Well, here's what comes along for changes in avoided death due to particulate matter in the United States when you look at shifting our energy from fossil fuels to renewables and shifting our passenger vehicles to electrified transport. What comes about is large reductions in per capita or deaths per million people, mostly in the eastern part of the United States. You could even pick out, the Ohio River and the Tennessee River, where most of our coal plants are in the eastern part of the country. If you think about a scenario, what we did is phase these in through 2030. If you do that, these would save on the order together of about 300,000 American lives. So if you find, I find that this can help if you're talking to somebody that's thinks that we should be taking great actions to deal with climate change, then they might find the numbers up at the top helpful. Talking to somebody who's not convinced of that, they might find these much more convincing. And of course, both are going to happen. So we should really be providing both of these kind of things to policymakers. One thing you can do, and this goes back to using kind of social costs, is you can look at the effect of the air pollution, what I call composition, change, the impact of that on public health. And so here I've adopted the methodology that the US EPA uses, value of a statistical life, and you look at the premature mortalities from all of those causes, stroke and heart disease and respiratory disease, etc. You look at how many people's lives are saved, and you put an economic price on that. Right? So that's conventional for the United States for rulemaking, health only. Then I have these values, what I call the social cost of atmospheric release. It's essentially the social cost of carbon that's used by the US government, but expanded to the other pollutants. So it includes methane, it includes particulate, it includes ozone. The government method only includes CO2. One thing that's interesting, I think, is if you look at how much studies have estimated it would cost to make these transformations, it's about $100 to $200 billion economy-wide, going out to 2030. So actually, it sounds like an extraordinary amount of money, but the amount of money put into the energy sector is actually in the trillions. So this is just redirecting a small portion of it, really. If you compare that with just the air quality related benefits, energy and transport together probably give you about 3 times that. So you can make the argument that says, since the health benefits are almost exclusively in the United States, it's a few percent in Canada and Mexico, right nearby. But essentially, these things, the pollution doesn't spread that far over the planet. Most of it is within the United States. So we get in our own national, it's in our own national self-interest, because we get about $400 billion in health benefits domestically by putting these policies into place that only cost, a quarter to a half that, right? And climate would just make, adding in climate would just make those benefits much, much more valuable. But even if you say, I'm not going to take action for climate, I think that'll put our companies at a competitive disadvantage. I'm not going to put any price on carbon. Even if you don't do that, you should be taking these policies. They're net beneficial domestically, regardless of whether you include climate or not. I mean, if you do, then they're more like 10 to 1. So I don't expect you to be able to follow the details here. I wanted to show you a couple of other examples of the kind of work, that was very US focused. The one on the upper left is looking at putting in vehicle regulations. So adopting essentially American, European, Japanese style type emission control standards in developing countries. You don't even have to go necessarily electrification everywhere, but a place like India or China, you can make huge gains in public health. You go from the white background as the baseline, the yellow background is the projections, and you could save thousands and thousands of lives. Right? So again, you also lower emissions of climate warming gases. So for the sake of climate, this is good. You also improve food security, but you affect public health probably the most dramatically. And if you do an economic analysis, which are included in some of these studies, public health tends to dominate the economic analysis. You can look at cases like, here's one from an even more recent study looking at shipping in East Asia, right? And the ships tend not to have any pollution controls because people think, well, they're just out in the water and we don't really care. And especially if they're in international waters, there's no actual regulations yet. They're working on that. So you can do a lot of these kind of analyses and look at climate, look at health, look at all the things that are important. There we go. The problem is, the one I just showed for the United States, this one for China, the one for vehicle standards, each of these requires a huge amount of effort. You have to, I'm not even counting the effort to get a grant to support work on this, but once you get the funding, it takes students and postdocs and programmers and a whole team using a huge number of supercomputer hours and many years to get any one of these results. So that's not really going to be applicable for people in developing countries that don't have access to that expertise. Even for, we get this kind of analysis from the EPA when legislation comes out of Congress and is a potential thing that the EPA might implement. But what if somebody's just curious, should we be relying so much on fracking? Is that a good idea? I get that kind of question from policy people a lot. Right? They don't want to, they're not going to commission the EPA to do a study for every question. So we have these very simple metrics like social cost of carbon. And that's useful, but I want to spend the rest of the time here talking about some work to try to expand the notion of what's included in metrics, right? So that you don't have to get a huge team together and spend years waiting for an answer, and you get a better answer, sure. I mean, it's a really nice kind of result. But that's not going to work in all cases. And so this comes from the last IPCC assessment, where we put together a chart that looks from emissions, drive concentrations, those drive radiative forcing, that drives climate change, and that causes the impacts that we were worried about. So for the sake of climate policies around the world, they tend to use radiative forcing. Sometimes climate change itself is used. You go up to the right and you get a metric. So if you go, for example, now to Europe, right, there is a trading system, and you can trade a certain number of tons of methane versus CO2 or other gases. It's all based on calculating the impact on climate change, based on the radiative forcing. So we have these metrics. They've actually spread down to Canada and the United States, California at least, not at the federal level. So what's being left out? Well, if you think back to that chart I showed where climate includes, the impacts here are going to be things like vector-borne diseases spreading. They're going to be things like malnutrition. What If you remember, though, that was linked to air quality, and food was linked to both. So when you emit something to the air, the proposal is that you look at the concentration, same as before, but you don't just look at radiant forcing. You look at the things you care about are that the stuff in the air is causing climate change, and it's causing air quality to change. And those are really affecting the exact same kind of thing, right? They're affecting health, and they're affecting our ability to grow food, and they're affecting our infrastructure, etc. And so there's no kind of underlying logic to saying, I'm going to leave out this pathway, and then I'm going to calculate all the effects of these emissions on health and agriculture and such, but I'm going to leave out these because they occur via different physical processes. So it seems, hopefully, if you find this at all convincing, it seems completely illogical to do that, and yet that's what every jurisdiction around the world currently does. I don't know of a single jurisdiction that includes this, although that coalition that I mentioned that then Secretary of State Clinton launched, that is a group of now 50 countries trying to work to do this kind of broader-based impact analysis that spans both. But all of the trading, the pricing systems in Canada and California and Chinese cities in Europe, they are all including this left side only. And just to make it really clear why that is potentially flawed, think about ozone. So ozone has effects on people, which I'm sure many of you know. It also has effects on plants that are really easy to see. So air with ambient ozone in Pakistan versus air that's been filtered, right? You do a controlled experiment and you just bring in the air from outside, and it is really bad for plant yields. And so a lot of people have been working on this. Studies have shown things like up to a third of wheat and rice is lost every year in India just due to air pollution. So it's a huge, huge impact, especially when you think of a place that is, it doesn't necessarily have advanced transportation capabilities, and it can be running out of food in these regional. So then what you're doing in current metrics is, if you look at, say, carbon dioxide causes heat stress in many parts of the world, causes drought stress by shifting rainfall patterns and leading to periods of drying, and both of those reduce your ability to grow food. So that's the kind of thing we already try to take into account when we look at social costs. Carbon, though, is fertilizer for plants, right? Plants take up carbon. We all know that's how they take up carbon and give out oxygen, and we do the reverse. So the net impact is still negative. Pretty much all the studies say that the net impact of CO2 is to decrease our ability to grow food, especially in lower latitude countries, which suffer more from the heat and drought stress, but worldwide, that's also true. If you compare with methane, same thing, it's a greenhouse gas, so it causes heat stress, it causes drought stress, but it doesn't fertilize. Right? Plants don't take up methane. It doesn't help them grow at all. And instead, methane produces ozone, which is what I was just showing you, is actually toxic to plants. So instead of offsetting via composition a lot of the climate-induced change, they're actually augmenting it and making it much, much worse. And so if you look at the projections going forward of high and low emission scenarios, the net effect of CO2 is negative, as I was saying. If you have high emissions, you will lower your crop yields by several percent. But if you have high emissions of methane, you might lower your crop yields by 5 times as much. So that's the kind of thing you're missing if you follow that traditional pathway, which says we just look at climate and we leave out anything related to air quality, because air quality is a totally separate issue. It's not a separate issue. Right? The effects that you really care about, how much food can we grow, what is public health like, these are influenced by both pathways. And they could care less about the process along the way. The endpoint impact is going to be important. So I just want to highlight a very complicated chart with lots and lots of arrows to try to bewilder everybody. An example of how you might do this kind of work for methane And this is what I'm gonna show you kind of the basic structure and then a few examples that I think are kind of interesting and maybe even kind of provocative. So methane makes a bunch of different gases. They affect climate change. Climate change would affect food, health, and infrastructure. That's what would be included in, say, the current system. If you add in that the ozone affects air pollution, and that also affects food, and that air pollution also affects human health, you can see that there are other pathways that lead to these same kind of impacts, and then the food affects health as well. So it turns out there's a lot of ways for methane in particular to affect human health. And I focus on methane instead of, say, one of the aerosols, because it's much easier to make a generic metric that's universally applicable for methane, because it's not as long-lived as CO2. It doesn't last for centuries, but it lasts for about a decade. So methane emitted anywhere is equivalent to methane emitted anywhere else. Doesn't matter the time of day, it doesn't matter the season, it doesn't matter which country, any kilogram of methane is the same. Right? So you can, therefore, it's also much easier from a scientific point of view. If I want to figure out what does my methane emission do to ozone, I don't have to run 1,000 models looking at methane in all these different places. So it's both easier to get the answer, and the answer is much more widely applicable. Right? So you can really go through and figure out a price. And when we do that, we get around $3,000 a ton is the proper price for methane. There are a lot of, I mentioned again, the ethical issues involved in setting a price, right? There's a value of future damages relative to the present. So what I've used here is a constant 4% discounting. That's essentially saying the value of money declines by 4% per year. So it doesn't give great weight to future generations. If you chose a lower value, you would actually, it's the lower value you choose, the larger the price gets, but the relative methane price versus CO2 would decrease, right? Because CO2 lasts for a long time and methane doesn't. So the more you kind of favor intergenerational equity and go to a lower value, the smaller this ratio gets, the larger the absolute numbers. So what the US government has traditionally done is provide a range of values. There's no right answer for how important is the welfare of future generations versus the present. The US tends to go as low as 2.5%. Work in the UK, where their Treasury Department has gone as low as 1 4/10%. Most private businesses use things more like 10%. But within that coalition that I mentioned, we work with, say, the oil and gas industry, and they want 10% because that's the kind of rate of return they expect on capital investments. And if you show them something at 4 or 2 or 3, they kind of laugh and move on. So this is kind of roughly in the middle, about $3,000 a ton, and about 76 relative to CO2. So that's about 3 times the value that is used currently in California or Canada or Europe, right, in current systems, because they're leaving out primarily the public health impacts, right? The impacts via changes in food security and via ozone being toxic when breathed in. You can, in fact, as I mentioned, since it's the same everywhere, you can quantify quite well how many people per year die from each megaton of methane. That's a little hard to necessarily kind of incorporate into policy or anything. But the economic numbers can be used. So I want to show you a few examples. Let's say you accept one of these numbers and you say, okay, it's about $3,000 a ton. What does that imply for changing things around the world? Well, there's a lot of things, I won't go into all of these, but there are a lot of methane control measures that are already identified and already in place in different parts of the world. And the blue shows how much these cost to put into place. And so you have things that cost, say $4,000 a ton and $3,500. Some things are negative. Right? So clearly there are other issues at work here. It's not simply a matter of economics. You have things like vented gas during gas production, right? instead of drilling for gas and you find some extra and you say, oh, it's going to cause a pressure blowout, rather than installing equipment, we'll just vent that out into the atmosphere. If you bothered to install the equipment, it would pay back, you'd have more gas, and so the net cost is negative. But as I mentioned, the oil companies want a 10% rate of return. So just having a negative net cost, if it pays back for itself in 4 years, we might think that's great. What a brilliant intervention. Let's use $50 million and install this equipment. And they say 0% after several years? That's terrible. I'm going to open a new oil field. Right, so negative still doesn't always get done. But the other reason it doesn't get done is because we don't have a price on the emission that tells you what the social damages are. And so if you add in the social damages, you get these orange bars, and they show you what kind of gains you might get by putting into place these interventions. So the highlights here are that things like not sending biodegradables into municipal waste is the single greatest thing you can do to provide social benefits. Vented gas during oil production is another huge one. Apparently, the Russian oil industry alone, they find a lot of oil on the north slope of Siberia, and they have oil pipelines, but they don't have gas pipelines. But they just think it's too much trouble to put them in. So they vent to the atmosphere about the same amount of gas as the United States uses every year. Just thrown up in the air, and why not? There's no price on it. And if you put that $3,000 a ton and you capture it, the cost is essentially zero, right? Because you're selling the gas at the end. Again, zero is not good enough for them. But the social benefits are about $80 billion in avoided deaths, avoided food losses, avoided climate change. So this is the kind of thing that I hope and help promote places like the World Bank to help provide funding when just the economics of even zero cost is not enough to get these things put into place. And this is the kind of thing that you see more often, at least in climate change. You see this for CO2, the cost curves, where you can intervene and what the net cost is to society. And so you can get around 100 megatons at negative net cost to society if you had an effective price on methane. But that's about a third of worldwide emissions. So it says, it's a hard thing to meet the Paris commitments. To really bring our emissions down so low requires dramatic changes in energy and mobility and agriculture, et cetera. A lot of these are related to agriculture. And it's saying that, if we do that, it is hard. It's a major transformation, but there are also major social benefits that come along with it, and especially benefits through human health. This one compares the cost in blue of different ways to generate electricity. And so again, if you apply the cost of the emissions that come along with the electricity, that's in orange, with methane being that little green bar. And so the cheapest one in blue is natural gas. And if you look at trends in the United States, during the last 10 years or so, we've gone almost exclusively to new natural gas when we build major power plants. We've also put in a fair amount of solar and wind. We've put in lots and lots of gas capacity. We've built no new coal plants, really. And so you can see the economics says, well, this one's more expensive. Why would we build this when it costs 9 cents and this costs 7 cents per kilowatt hour? But the real cost is if you add in the damages caused by all this stuff that comes out from the gas plant, it's more like 13. So do we add in those damages? Well, no. The government's policy since the 90s has been to calculate the damages, but not actually apply them. There's no price on the emissions, any emissions in the United States, with the exception now of California. In fact, we give lots and lots of tax credits to the fossil fuel industry. So we actually subsidize many of this, as well as, of course, most of these damages from both gas and coal come from the public health tools. And so in effect, we're subsidizing that too, since we pay the health bills. What we do is put into place things like, these are mostly from air pollution, about 4 cents or so is from climate change, all the rest from air pollution. Gas is about half from methane. And what we do is put into place things like a production tax credit in the US for wind. about 2.2 cents is the current tax policy. And so there have been a bunch of studies saying, well, is that a good use of our effectively spending money? Really, it's a tax credit, so it's not actually an outlay, but it's deferred or foregone income. Is that a good use? Do we get the appropriate benefit for that that says that that price is set right? So we're essentially saying we're dropped down about here. And that helps make wind much more attractive, right? We wouldn't be building so much wind without that. I don't know if this will get renewed, but currently our tax credit is actually well below the difference between wind and primarily wind substitutes for gas. Nuclear is too slow to adjust, so it's not really, if you have a new windmill, you're not going to change a nuclear plant or even a coal plant, and gas has been shown to be the primary power production that's traded with wind. So the more wind we build, the more we avoid these damages, and in fact, our current production tax credit is only about a third of what it really should be. We're really getting more like 6 cents. So here's some of the other things that I think are most interesting, just to kind of finish up. Another way that we emit a lot of methane is by looking at what we eat. So you remember I had that diagram from the global burden of disease, and I had stars on all the things related to diet. So diet is related to a lot of public health issues. It's also related to a lot of our methane emissions, right? So methane is the second most important greenhouse gas. Huge amount of it comes from the agricultural sector, and most of that comes from livestock. So in Western countries, people tend to eat far too much red meat compared to healthy diet guidelines. So if you shift diets to the healthy dietary guidelines, or meat in blue and dairy in orange, you would get roughly 170 billion in societal benefits from the emissions alone. Right? So that's not even counting all of the public health benefits that obviously the whole reason they're called healthy diets is because they make you healthier, right? But you also have this big, large-scale environmental benefit from reducing the emissions. And that counts for CO2 also. But the bulk of that is methane. Right? So when we have a lot of livestock, we tend to clear a lot of land, deforest, and release CO2. We tend to use a lot of land to grow crops to feed the cattle, and then the cows themselves emit a lot of methane. Right? So the net effect is that the cows have a huge environmental footprint. Right? And there's other things you can do too. There's more technological interventions like changing the feed that's given to the cows, or changing livestock management practices. Reducing food wastage, of course, reduces demand. All of these things can be quite nice and provide some pretty large benefits. But the single biggest thing is providing would be to manage to get change to a healthy diet, right? Generally, less meat and dairy consumption. And so there's been a lot of work on that. One of the studies I like the best is this Springman et al. Work, where the cost there was calculated to be about 270 billion due to reduced healthcare costs and lost work days. And so in that study, they didn't have the prices that I've shown you. So they tried to include some estimate of environmental damages and said that they were very small and not terribly important. But I get that they are actually smaller than the direct health cost. But if you're making an argument that from a cost point of view, this has a big impact on society, that we pay a large bill for people eating too much meat, then this number actually is not true. It's about 2/3 of the direct health care. There's huge costs associated with premature mortality and such as related to diet itself. But in some sense, those would be considered more, you might consider those kind of a self-inflicted thing that you wouldn't charge for. A lot of time, policy will set a price on the costs that are delivered to the rest of society, right? So if somebody eats poorly and they suffer for it, you don't necessarily charge them for it. But if somebody eats poorly and everybody suffers for it, which they do from environmental emissions or from passing on healthcare costs and lost work days, then that's what tax policy often does, is impose a cost, right? Like on cigarettes, things like that. So this would give us an idea, just for the sake of the environmental benefits, the tax would be about 90 cents per pound for red meat in the United States. Right? If you added in this, it would be more like $3 a pound. So pretty expensive when you think about the footprint of, say, a hamburger. If you count in water, you count in other impacts on biodiversity from preparing all this land, I'm sure you get a much larger value. You can also do the same kind of things regionally. The US tends to have bigger potential benefits than, for example, the European Union. Our diets tend to be worse. We tend to waste a lot more food, especially dairy. I don't know why that is. And the Europeans already have far better management practices than we do. But a lot of the changes also in the developing world for non-dietary choices, for things like management and food waste, those tend to be bigger in the developing world. So you can do kind of regional comparisons too. So I just want to finish up by saying the idea is that maximizing social welfare, instead of focusing just on climate or just on food or just on air quality, we can try to look across these. Methane, I think, is a good example because it affects food and air quality and climate. It's also well enough understood and well mixed that we can do this kind of study and get, I think, a very robust number. Given recent trends, need to deal with things like natural gas. Usage is growing very rapidly in the United States. We really need to get this number right. Our current price is $0 for methane, so clearly that is not good. Even if you disagree with my 3,000, $0 is certainly not a good price. So we don't have the incentive to optimize our emissions reductions. For other health-related emissions, we need more detailed analysis. Like for particulate, it's harder to set one number because it varies from place to place. But it's clear that maximizing societal welfare is not the same as just maximizing one of these things. Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to engage further with people, remembering that I'm only right over in environment.
Two things. One, I just rented a car in San Francisco, and it was $40 a day. But a Prius was $25. So there are potential ways that even the car industry, rental car industry, could promote, electric cars. I mean, I thought that was fascinating. I hadn't seen that before. Another is working with Fred Boito, talking about used cars that get sent to particularly Africa, but they have to be 9 or 10 years old before they go, and so they're getting the worst of possible emissions.
Yeah, so for the first point, I hadn't heard that about the rental agencies, and that's quite nice. I mean, right now the federal government has a tax credit for electric cars, so that's another way you can promote this kind of things. But of course, you can't charge your car very easily, and so there are a lot of other things. I agree that that's the kind of thing that should be done, and there have been some studies about things like imposing taxes related to environmental damages on food and on motor vehicle choice, and on even for gasoline vehicles. You could have a fee based on your miles per gallon. If you're below average, you pay a fee. If you're above, you get a credit. There's been a lot of interesting studies, but it's nice to see something in practice. For the other one, that is a real problem. And it's even one of the worst things I've ever heard is how a lot of the cars come from Europe to Africa, and they come equipped with pollution control equipment. It's a little out of date, right? It's not the best. But then the fuel still has high sulfur in it, which immediately corrodes the catalytic converters. And so they no longer even meet the old standards. They destroy all the equipment that they got for free. But the industry is reluctant to put the effort into desulfurizing the fuel. So it's really, that's an area, I mean, we could make a huge progress with a small investment, but there are economic and political barriers.
So, Drew, thanks. That was a great talk. I have a comment and then a question. So my comment is for the students in the room, next term, Drew is teaching a graduate course that deals with many of these same issues, and he tells me there are no prerequisites, and global health students are more than welcome to sign up. So it's a good opportunity to pursue this further. I wanted to ask you about you had a figure that showed that one of the best ways of reducing methane emissions in the U.S. is to divert biodegradable waste from our landfills. Can you talk a little bit more about what that would entail, what kind of technology, what kind of incentives?
Yeah, so that was a global analysis. And in the US, it is still one of the best measures. It's not quite as powerful as world average because we do have rules on capturing methane from landfills. But, so what we do in the US is you tend to be able to put as much as you want into a landfill, and then the EPA has rules about covering the landfills and capturing the methane. And that's the way we've gone, which is not terrible, I would say, but it's expensive. Right? So that requires a lot of technology. That's the kind of thing that now, say, this World Bank Fund, and before it, the Clean Development Mechanism under the UNFCCC has funded that kind of work in developing countries. But if you don't put biodegradables in the landfill in the first place, then they never generate. So it really requires shifting to composting, which is, in the end, depends on the locality, but places like New York City, when they put into place composting, waste disposal is expensive. Everything's trucked far away. It ends up being a net cost savings. In some places where there's, in a developing country where you might just still be throwing everything in a big pile, it would be a cost. So you'd have to create a whole composting system, and lots of work has shown that unless you make it easy, people don't do it. So they don't have to bring stuff somewhere, you have to go pick it up. But that's essentially what's done much more in Europe, is the waste never gets to the landfill. It's much cheaper than after the fact.
Yeah. I'm just wondering the whole analysis, how much comes from the underdeveloped countries, how much weight do you give to the underdeveloped countries in the whole analysis regarding cost and benefits? Because in some countries, like so Western countries, deforestation, where they ban maybe the trees to create this emission, purposely is for food production. They have to feed themselves and not die. So there's that benefit and that cost in terms of pollution, and they may offset each other. And how would that factor into this global analysis that you're doing?
So I would say there's two ways that issue comes up, and especially for something like methane. And what I've done for things like livestock management and food waste is rely on the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization. So they provide estimates of what the footprint is of, say, livestock in a particular country. And you're right, the imprint on, say, CO2 emissions varies from place to place. Some places have very energy intensive generation of fertilizer, which then emits while you're making the fertilizer, and then they use fertilizer extremely intensely, so you get a lot of nitrogen. So there are a lot of variations from place to place. That I didn't really go into except that last slide. Europe and the US, for example. The other area where that comes in, I think is what you're getting at, is what value do you assign to impacts in different places? And that's a really challenging one. And so I didn't go into that, but I try to do that in multiple ways. And I think you can make the argument that how much, a lot of the studies of how much, say, preventing a premature death is worth rely on local evidence from how much people are willing to pay to avoid dying early, which varies dramatically among income. So poor people are worth far less, which nobody really likes to say that explicitly or emphasize that. So I've weighted impacts on human health according to income in different regions, and then I've done that with kind of assuming a more uniform value to see what difference it makes. The other question that comes, or the other issue that comes up with something like methane is those benefits, are spread out over the whole world. And so that's the kind of thing that goes back to these questions like you get in the United States. The other argument you get about, say, the Clean Power Plan is that, or any climate policy, are, it's a tenth of a degree and we'll never see it. And the other is that almost you're saying it's worthwhile, but almost all of the benefits for climate are outside the United States. Well, of course they are. A country's only 6% of the world's land area. It's not going to be the majority of the benefits. And so there have been hearings in Congress where they've said you should change the cost and only account for the part that happens locally. So if you did that for methane, the cost would be $20. It'd be far, far less. But if everybody does that, then we don't end up making any progress because everybody set the price to be really, really small. So I include effects regardless of where they take place, and you can make an argument that you shouldn't do that, and they're weighted according to local incomes.
Then do you have an estimate on how much methane each person produces for their lifetime?
Sorry, how much?
How much methane a person will produce over their lifetime?
A person?
Yeah.
You mean through their diet?
Through anything.
I've never thought about that.
Because I'm wondering if you're talking about
Like a carbon footprint, a methane footprint.
right. Because what I was thinking, if you're assigning a cost for premature death,
yeah,
you'd also have to account for the fact that that person will be responsible for less methane being produced, right? Because they're out of the.
That's an interesting one. I've never heard that level of feedback being included. Right? Like the Clean Air Act, you don't say that the EPA doesn't do a retrospective analysis and say we saved this many lives and therefore got this benefit. They don't say, oh, but since all those people weren't dead, they're driving cars and turning on the light switch, and so actually there's more emissions, which is true. My guess is that small. It's kind of an interesting question. I don't know.
It's kind of like if you want to save money on healthcare, close all the hospitals.
Yeah, exactly. That would work. And it would be interesting to calculate, say, the footprint, and some of the work on the health costs have looked at, say, the footprint of a person that consumes a lot of beef versus a vegetarian or pescatarian and such. And you can look at, people have done analyses of environmental footprints of lots of foods, but dairy and meat from cattle in particular are kind of dwarf everything else. So everything else, there's small variations. But that would be, your emissions of methane, I think, would depend enormously on how much we do. Be an interesting question.
I'm afraid we're out of time, but thanks very much, Drew.